Hello my dear friends, you're in the MIlitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of March of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the Ukraine report of work of their air defense. By 6 p.m. of Ukrainian time, the Ukrainians reported that they managed to brought down up to 2 Su-34 just during the previous 24 hours. Of course, if believe Ukrainians, they managed to achieve significant results in air defense, and if we calculate the Russian losses of this model of aircraft, for the previous 2 weeks, the Russians lost up to 15 or even more Su-34 of the type. Of course, significant results. Later, right before we start making the video, we got additional report from the armed forces of Ukraine, and according to Ukrainians, they managed to brought down not just Su-34 during the day, also they managed to brought down the Death Star, and they managed to destroy the Emperor destroyer. So significant results. I can't even tell you what kind of air defense the Ukrainians are using. Maybe they're using Jedis on the line of combat contact, who knows, but the results obviously are very powerful and very strong. Now let's talk about F-16s. According to information we have, and according to, let's say, Politico, F-16 will become a burden for the Ukraine army. F-16s will begin arriving in Ukraine in the coming months, so very soon. But pilots retraining along will not be enough to use them. Politico writes, American pilots called the fighter a sensitive beast in comparison with the Soviet MiG or Ansu, which Ukraine is accustomed to. They require a high level of maintenance and a smooth runway, which is impossible in wartime. Furthermore, the MI6 reported that the Russians have already collected the targets they're planning to attack within the next few days. And let's read the report. MI6 transmitted new intelligence data to the office of the president and the general staff about the preparation by Russian troops of attacks on military airfields in the western Ukraine, which are being prepared for F-16s. British intelligence believes that the Russians' task is to prevent fighter jets from being based in Ukraine. So everything, as you can see, is very connected to every single post is connected to each other. Furthermore, we got more details about the use of Su-24, and now the Ukrainians don't have possibility to use this type of weapon, but this Su-24 is something like single use model. The Ukrainians have significant number of this type of plane. They can be easily upgraded to use Storm Shadow or maybe Scalp missiles, but as you can see, according to reports we received during the previous days, the Russians managed to destroy a significant number of this model, and almost every single week we got additional report of destroy of additional Su-24. Furthermore, we got very important updates from Russia. According to information we have, it is reported that another AWACS aircraft A50U has been delivered to the ranks of the Russian airspace forces. If you remember, during the previous 2 months, the Russians, as a result of friendly fire, destroyed and brought down 2 planes of the type, and this is a very important, let's say, part of Russian air forces. And when talking about the future, let's say future F-16s arriving on the territory of Ukraine, probably this AWACS aircraft A50 is the best type of equipment that can easily discover and to control and target F-16s in the sky of Ukraine. So this is a very important type of weapon, and that's why the Russians understand that they need not just to bring this type of weapon to the line of combat contact, but also they need to renew and restart building them, because currently the Russians are not doing this. Furthermore, for further F-16 arriving to Ukraine, the Russians continue clearing operation all over the line of combat contact, and today we got additional video of how the Russians managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian S-300 system. The system was discovered somewhere on Donetsk direction to the southeast west of Pokrovsk, and as a result of artillery strike probably or Tornado S strike, that S-300 system was destroyed. So it's not just the first video. Let's say for the previous few days, for the previous probably week, the Russians published up to 2 videos of destroyed S-300s exactly on Donetsk and Avdiivka direction. And when talking about air defense systems, of course, it's very important to talk about the Russian test, the Russian military exercises that took place in Arkhangelsk area. According to the Russians, on the 22nd of February of 2024, the Russians tested S-500 system. Imagine yourself, S-500 system, and the main purpose and the main goal of those those military exercises was to brought down the hypersonic missile. So just imagine yourself, the Russians currently managed to create the air defense system that can bring down the hypersonic missiles. We know for sure that the Western countries still, let's say, don't have, let's say, correct, stable hypersonic missiles, type of missile, and the Russians have already created the air defense system for potential hypersonic missiles of the Western countries. And this is as I understand, this is very important. Now we're moving to Ukraine once again, but before talking about the situation on the ground, the important thing continue coming from Moldova. According to information we have, the head of Gaugas Autonomy, Evgeny Gutsul, representing the opposition political force of Ilan Shor, whom the Moldovan authorities accuse of connections with the Russian Federation, during a visit to Moscow, stated that the rights of Gaugus people are being infringed by Moldovan authorities and that the autonomy wants to develop relations with Russia. Gaugasia demands the resumption of air traffic between Chisinau and Moscow. This is a very important statement. If you remember, a few days ago, probably 2 days or something like this, we got another report from Transnistria, and if you remember, there was a meeting, and there was let's say meeting of the Congress of the Deputies of the Republic, and they addressed not only to Russia but the whole world, and they adopted something like a declaration where they were asking to help them to not to fight but to survive under the pressure of Moldovan center and Moldovan capital and something like this. So once again, when talking about the situation, we see that currently the situation develops the same way as the situation developed 2 years ago in let's say in Ukraine, in DPR and LPR. First two countries of Ukraine, let's say that was Ukraine 2 years ago, asked the help from Russia. Then the Russians made few, let's say, legal things, and after that we got the special military operation. When talking about Moldova, currently we see the same story. Two regions ask for a help from Russia, and very likely that this is not something like not important. There are two regions and both of them ask for help from Russia. Very likely something is going to happen here. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and of course first we're going to talk about Avdiivka direction. We continue receiving significant number of details of updates, and the most important update is that the Russians continue pushing towards Tonenke, because during the previous days we got a lot of videos from the village, but most of them were just the Telegram messages, Twitter messages, X social network messages, where we got in updates that the Russians managed to establish complete control, part control. The Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back, and many other updates without any geolocated proofs. And just today, on the 2nd of March, we will start receiving real confirmation of Russian control over the village. And on this video, for example, we can see the Russian flag on the southeastern part of the village, confirming the Russian progress and Russian control over at least 50% of the territory. So this is not the entire village, obviously, but the Russians managed to bypass the most important, the most difficult defense belt, and we're talking about this defense belt that lays right in front of Vadiana, Peski, that the Russians couldn't establish control over during the previous phases of the special military operation. When talking about the northwestern part, today we got a lot of updates of how the Russians were bombing this territory with multi-launch rocket systems. So according to some mappers and according to some sources on the ground, this territory also was captured by the Russians, but when talking about geolocations, we still see some videos of how the Russians are still trying to clear, to attack, to suppress the Ukrainian positions and to force them to fall back. Currently, I can't tell you for sure whether this territory is under Russian control or not, but geolocations are saying that there are still clashes for this territory. Now let's move to Orlivka, and we got the same story. We have a lot of geolocations that confirms the Russian progress. On this video, for example, we can see another Russian flag in the southern part, in the central part of the southern part of Orlivka, the Russian flag above some building, which confirms Russian control. So at least this territory, this is the school, was captured by the Russians. When talking about northern flank, we haven't received any geolocations, just geolocations of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes against the Russian forces, let's say on the edge positions on the line of combat contact. So for now we have just 100% confirmation that the Russians control just a part of Orlivka. The rest of the Orlivka either is in the gray zone or under complete Ukrainian control. On this video we can see Ukrainian FPV drone bombing of Russian troopers in this part of Orlivka. So if we add some lines, we can make conclusions that the Russians control everything that located to the east of this, let's say, red line. So everything here is under complete control, and very likely the territory that located to the west, to the left of this red line is in the gray zone. Once again, most of the mappers have already updated their maps showing this territory in the complete Russian, let's say, control. When talking about Berdichi, the Russians continue offensive operation. We got a lot of updates, and we have delocated of Russian attack in this area. The Russian personnel carrier was moving along the streets. The personnel carrier got on mine, but continue moving. Then we can see the Russian landed in this area and start clearing the territory. But that attack wasn't successful. The Ukrainians managed to redeploy the reinforcements, let's say Bradley, and Bradley managed first to pin down the Ukrainians, the Russians, and then to force them to fall back. So that was an attack, but not very successful. From the other side, we continue receiving updates of how the Russians attacked and bombed the Ukrainians in Severnaya area, in Severnaya village, the last village on this direction, the last stronghold and fortification area that located on the Ukrainian side of Durna River. The Russians bombed Ukrainian positions, destroyed few ammo depots, warehouses, but once again we see for now there is no progress on the ground. Once again, according to information we have, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the front line, but not because of like good fortifications or a good smart tactics, or I don't know how to say, best let's say approach or best experience or something like this. The Ukrainians managed to stabilize this area for a while using the significant number of infantry, troopers, let's say meat waves, meat grinder, and so on. And currently the main brigades who are responsible for defense of the area are the 47th mechanized and 61st mechanized brigade. On this video we can see the destroyed vehicles and so on. Furthermore, the Western countries, the New York Times for example, reported the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine is surprisingly weak. Writes the New York Times. Russian troops continue to make small but rapid gains outside Avdiivka, partly due to dwindling Ukrainian ammunition and dwindling Western aid. Let's say this was like from the New York Times, but there is another reason for the advance of Russian troops in this area: the poor defense of Ukraine. As we talked in the previous time, the head of Tavria direction told us that now there are very high chances that they are able to slow down the Russians due to the water barriers and the hills and something like this. So the hills is the only factor that helped the Ukrainians to slow down the Russians, not the fortification trenches or something like this. So the clashes in this area continues. And another important thing about F16s, and we will move then further, the Russians are planning to let's say to start using up to 20 Su57s with H69 missiles in Ukraine by the end during the 2024. And these Su57s are invisible with the latest missiles, and it's very interesting to see real combat between F16 and these Su57s. Very interesting, but my assistants have already told me that regarding the use of Su57, the Ukrainians at the first day of the use of this type of aircraft will publish update that they managed to destroy probably additional 3 Death Stars and 100 Su57s. Now we're moving to Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction, where we have also some clashes. We haven't received any indications about further progress in Ivanovska. According to the information we have, the Russians, as we discussed, according to the mappers, controls something like this, but without any geolocated proofs of that. So I see that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians publish any videos from the territory, because currently nobody knows who is winning. Maybe the Russians, maybe the Ukrainians. The losses I have, both sides have significant losses. The only thing we have is some FPV drone strikes from the central part of Ivanovska and the western part of Ivanovska, which confirms the moving of Russian progress further to the west. And probably we can use this EV video as an evidence of further Russian progress and changing of the focus. So the Russians used to have focus in this part, and now the focus is here. So this is like an evidence. Obviously this is like an evidence. Furthermore, when talking about Ivanovska, we have let's say the FPV drone control over the main supply roads, and the Russians continue bombing Chasiv Yar, the eastern part of the stronghold. Significant number of FABs, significant number of different types of weapon arrived today in this area, and the Ukrainians have no chances. But if you ask my opinion, and if you take a look at Chasiv Yar, first thing that comes to my mind is of course Ugledar. Ugledar is the same as the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. Very powerful and very big stronghold, and lots of high-rise building that Ukrainians will use as the main defense belt with the purpose to slow down the Russians. And until the Russians reduce this territory to ruins, the chances to attack and to capture this part of Chasiv Yar is very low, either to bypass the area from the north or from the south, or to have make any other plan. Now we got continue receiving updates from the strongholds between Popovo Forest, New Cemetery, and Chasiv Yar itself. According to the mappers, currently the Russians control something like this. They managed to enter the stronghold trenches. They managed to completely establish control over the Popovo Forest and to get additional advances further along the tree line. Nothing happened in Siver's direction. The Russians published, the Ukrainians published few videos from Bilogorovka. During the previous 24 hours or 48 hours, the Russians made few attempts to attack the landfill, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians, and the Russians, having losses, were forced to fall back. What was we discussed on Tonenke, we have additional Russian control over additional tree lines, and according to the sources, the distance between the edge Russian positions and Tonenke itself is less than 1 kilometer. So the Russians can attack Tonenke already with the tanks, so the distance, as you can see, very short. We have a very big activity of the Russian forces on the borderlands. We have additional Lancet strikes. The Russians continue suppressing, destroying Ukrainian artillery forces, ammo depots, warehouses, tanks in hidden positions. On this video we got another mortar strike which destroyed Ukrainian, let's say, position. And now we have also, during the previous night, the Russians attack Kharkiv with Gerain, significant number of drones, so significant number of damage. And now we understand the words of Zelensky. He had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Netherlands in Kharkiv, and he suggested the residents not to return home from evacuation at this time because the situation is critical. And this activity shows us that very likely the Russians will not stop in Kharkiv. They will try to bypass it and move further to the Dnieper. Now we are moving to southern Donetsk. We haven't received, as you can see, almost anything there. Just another video of use of FAP against the coal mine, and this is very important because not the video of against the coal mine. The most important is that the Russians have increased their activity on this direction, and just during the previous week we got significant number of videos from the area. Let's increase the numbers since the 25th of February, and most of the strike took place in Ugledar itself. We see how the Russians were bombing the territory, and this activity tells us that very likely the Russians do have some plans for further, let's say, offensive or another attempt to attack. I'll remind you that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians made 4 attempts to storm Ugledar, but all of them were repelled by the Ukrainians. And the same story about the coal mine. We have one video and we have 2 strikes in the same area. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything from the area, just regular clashes, regular activity. The Russians were bombing the main supply roads between Novodanilovka, Takmachka with FAPs. Even if take this back, we got just one vehicle that was moving along the road, and after that the Russians start bombing the territory, and as you can see, very far from that vehicle. So very difficult to understand, but anyway, some activity without any progress on the ground. And the same story about Kharkiv, just the exchange of drone strikes, artillery strikes, without any changes on the ground as well. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.